everyone, it's Lindy from Pink Whisper Designs. Today we're going to make these fun ephemera tags. We're going to be using some of the paper dolls and lots of products from Tim Holtz. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm starting with the Tim Holtz Distress tags. I've just grabbed one of those. We're going to make a couple of tags, so let's start with this one. And then I've got the Tim Holtz Idea-ology Collage Paper, and this one is called Palette. So what I'm going to do is just select the area that I want for each of my tags. I'll use that portion to the right for the second tag, and then I'm going to use these yellows and oranges and greens for this first tag. So let's go ahead and attach this to our tag. We're using the Distress Collage medium. This will allow us to attach it to our tag very easily. And then I've got a collage brush. This is also from the Tim Holtz collection. And I'm going to apply that collage medium all over this tag. So you want to get a nice coating of that. And then this collage paper is the consistency of like a tissue paper. So here I'm laying it flat, but you certainly don't have to worry about any little wrinkles or creases. Sometimes it looks even more interesting when you have those. I am flattening it out so that you can see that you can easily lift it up and press that into place. And then I need a little bit more for the very top there, which I'm sorry you can't see, but I will show you that on the next one. So then I'll just apply that collage medium over the entire tag. And then I'm just going to use my pick tool just to pick that up off my glass media mat. Let's do the second one really quickly. Same thing. I'm going to apply that collage medium, and then I've got that leftover piece that we cut earlier, and then I do need a little piece for the top again. So I'll place a strip of that. I'm just going to tear some and place it right over the top. Don't worry about those holes. We'll be punching those out in a little while. So let's use that pick tool and pick that one up, and then I'm going to set these aside to dry. Once they were dry, I've got my Tim Holtz Titanium Shears. These are nice 9.5-inch shears, so it's really easy to cut away any excess. I'm just following the shape of the tag, and then let's go ahead and do that for the second one as well. I've got some white distress paint, and that's the picket fence, and I'm going to take just a flat edge brush and brush this on. Now I was going to do just a few little areas. It would look something like that, but then I decided to go over the top of the entire piece. So I decided to kind of mute out that background a little bit. And at this point I wasn't exactly sure what my tags were going to look like. So then I took a little bit of water on a paper towel and I wiped away a little bit of that excess white paint. And here I'll do that same thing again. So while it's damp, we can wipe away a little bit of that. But again, you could just put it in certain areas and not all over if you prefer. So I'm just creating a background at this point. I'm going to sand off those edges. I've got a little sanding block, and I'm just going to sand away that excess tissue paper. So I did that for both of these. And now I'm going to come in with the vintage photo and the mini applicator tool, and I'm going to go around all the edges of each of the tags. This is going to start to distress it a little bit, and again, at this point I don't know exactly where this project is going, so I just kind of start to build my background first, and then I'm just going to punch those holes. I've got a 1/4 inch hole punch, so I'll just open those holes back up. Now I've got from Tim Holtz, these are the stamp and stencil sets, which scrapbook.com just started carrying these, and I really love these. They come with a stencil that has 2 different designs on it, and then you get the stamps included, and there's several different sets. This one has those 3 beautiful flowers. Today I'm just going to use the top part of the stencil. I really like the look of that alphabet, and I'm just going to go back to that vintage photo ink and apply some ink here and there. A lot of this will get covered again, but here's my base. I'm just starting kind of laying out and getting things prepped and ready to go. So now I'll do that same thing for the second tag. And I finished that one off camera. And then I've got the Distress Spritz. And this is also in the vintage photo. Now you do want to make sure you shake that up really well. You want to get that shimmer off the bottom of your container. And then you want to shake it up really well. I just place the nozzle right inside the container and spatter it. And you'll get this beautiful shimmer in the background. Now with the paper dolls from the Tim Holtz Idea-ology collection, and also the Ephemera. This is the Keepsakes collection. And you can see you get all of these items in this package. So I'm going to select a few items for each of my dolls. I selected the little girls, 2 sets of them. And then I selected some ephemera that I thought would go nicely with these. The one on the left I'm kind of keeping more with the pinks and reds. And then the one on the right I've added a little touch of blue. Now I'm going to start to add these pieces of ephemera to my tag. And this first one I'm going to just tear it. And if you tear back and forth away from you and towards you, you get that nice ruffled edge. I'll add some vintage photo ink to that edge, and I'm going to be adding that to all of these pieces. I want to distress all of the pieces. I want to make sure they all have that really nice vintage look, and it also finishes off the edge of these as well. So then they don't look as much like cutouts. They really have a nice finished edge to them. So here I'm going to just lay this out and see what I like and what this looks like. And then once I like that, I'm going to tear a few of these pieces. I'll tear this one, and then I'll add that ink again. Now do keep in mind that all of the products I'm using today are listed and linked down below and also on my blog. And then for these little postage stamps, I'm just going to ink that. I cut away the rest of it. I don't like to waste my ephemera, so I'm just going to keep what I tore off for another project. And then I can go ahead and start gluing these together. I'm not putting glue all the way to the top of that one because I do want to tuck these other items down inside. That one will be hanging off the edge, but in a little bit we'll cut that away. And then I'm just curling up the edges a little bit on some of these, just again to give it a more vintage look. So I'm just using my fingers to curl that up. And then let's go back to our scissors and cut away that excess. With this little postage, I'm going to go ahead and ink that up. And then the flowers will go right along the bottom of this tag, and that's where I can tuck my little girls in. They'll look like they're standing in a little field of flowers, so I thought that would be fun. I'll just slide those down in, and look at how cute they are. I love this. So I'm going to again cut away anything excess hanging over the edges. You could certainly leave some of that hanging over the sides if you prefer. You don't have to clean that up. And then let's go back to that vintage photo ink and go back around any of those edges where we cut away some of that excess. Take away that white edge. For the second tag, we've got some more of that ephemera, and again we're just going to kind of lay this out and see what we like. I'm going to tear this one. These two will look fairly similar. I wanted to show you how quick and easily you could create a couple different tags, 2 or 3 tags, without having to rethink the whole process. We're basically just going to use that same recipe for this one as well. Again, inking up the edges. And then what we're going to be doing is adding a little bit of color to these girls with our distress crayons. So that'll add a little bit more interest to them. And for this piece, I'm going to just cut away some of that excess. And then we'll also be adding some little gems. And I do want to show you how I dyed some of the mummy cloth that we'll be using for the ribbons. That was really fun. and it really gives it a vintage look. So if you're trying to match something to your project exactly, this is a great way to do it. And I'll show you that as we go along. So let's add this piece. Again, I'm just tearing a little bit. Just have fun with this. This is really fun. You really can't go wrong. Just have fun kind of layering up your pieces and the different color combinations that you like. And you can start to see that a lot of that background gets filled in, but it still adds a lot of interest and texture. Where you can see it, it really is kind of cool. So now I'm going to add some ink to these flowers. And these girls will be standing kind of in that little garden of flowers, just like the other ones. So let's add some glue. I'm just using that Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. Again, back to that ink applicator tool and just go around those edges where anywhere you added some ephemera. And then I thought I'd add this little ticket as well. So these little tags would be great added to your scrapbook pages or your journals, any of your mixed media projects, or just as a standalone. I did want to show you with the little girls, we're going to add those distress crayons. And I want to show you up close. They have a shine to them. You can see that there in the camera. And so that's going to allow us to apply some distress crayons. This is the vintage photo right over the top. And we'll be able to move that ink around because of that glossy finish on these. So you don't need to apply the distress collage medium over top. Usually you would do that. If it was a porous surface, you would want to add that collage medium so that you could easily spread this coloring out. But since there's that glossy finish to these, I'm easily able to apply that crayon to the dolls and then just blend it out with my finger. And as you can see, I'm not being fussy at all. I really just want to add a little bit of color to the dresses. And I'm kind of leaving the center areas the lightest. Later on, I'll show you, I did decide to come in with a little bit of the spun sugar on these dresses as well. And I will add a little bit of color to the collar on the little dolls. And for this one, I'm going to do the same thing, just blending that in with my finger. Now, if you're having a hard time blending it with your finger, you could always spray a little water onto a paper towel or take a baby wipe and then just get a little bit of that water on your finger and then go to your project, and it might spread a little bit easier for you. But with this glossy finish, you might end up removing the crayon that you just laid down. So I like to work with it dry, just right out of the crayon when I'm using it on the paper dolls and some of the ephemera. But here's that spun sugar, and I'm going to add that to the cheeks, kind of the faces and the cheeks. It's a small little area, so I just kind of blend that in. Again, I'm not being fussy. I'm just trying to add a little bit of color to these little girls' faces. And there's where you see I did decide to grab a paper towel, spritz it with a little bit of water, and that will allow me to blend it out or remove it altogether. You can use, if you don't like the way it looks, you can just remove it this same exact way. So it will take off a little bit of the ink, but it will also allow me to blend it a little bit lighter than the way I had it on there. So you can keep coming back in with that color until you get the look that you're going for. And now here is where I'm adding some of it to her skin, to their arms, just a little touch of it to their arms. I'll do the same thing for these two little girls. And then I thought their hair could just use a little bit of brightening. So you'll see that I'm going to bring in the squeezed lemonade, and it's really just to get some highlights on the hair. You could use white as well. You could use the picket fence distressed crayon if you prefer, but I thought this just added a little bit of a highlight to the top of their hair without adding a lot of color. Back to the spun sugar to do the bow on her hair. Again, I'm just getting a little bit of water on my finger and blending that out a little bit more. And then with the speckled egg, I'm going to add a little color to the collars. I was going to do the spun sugar, but I did decide to do the speckled egg just to bring in a little bit more of that blue. And then with the quote chips, these are the labels. I love these. I love the shape of these, and you get so many of these. I use these a lot. They're really fun. They're a kind of a heavy, thick chipboard. They have the greatest sentiments on them. One of these says, "Go where your heart takes you." And the other one says, "Together is my favorite place to be." And I just love those. I love that oval shape. I added a little bit of the vintage photo around the edges of these just to take away that cardboard look on the sides of them. And then we'll just position these and glue these in place. And again, these will add a lot of dimension. You could pop them up as well, but I think I'll just lay them flat. They have quite a bit of dimension just as they are. So at this point, I wanted to do a little bit more spattering on some of the ephemera that we added. So I'm going back to that same Distress Spritz, and I'm going to spatter this. I just didn't want to get the spatters on the little girls' faces or on their dresses. So I'm spattering all of the ephemera, but I'm covering the little girls and my sentiments. And then I went to the Tim Holtz idea-ology. These are the Heirloom Florals. I'm just trying to pick a couple of these. I kind of like those little roses. They're kind of a creamy color. You could add a little ink to those as well if you wanted to antique those a little bit. I'm going to use them as they are. I've got a couple little small foam squares. Those are from scrapbook.com. And then with my multi-medium matte glue, I'm going to add a little bit of glue where it overlaps that quote chip. Then it will lay nice and flat on my tag. And that multi-medium matte glue will glue down all kinds of different things: fabric, metal, resin, just about anything. With the mummy cloth, so this is from Halloween. I always like to dig through all of my products, and so I'm going to grab this mummy cloth. And I wanted to show you that I sprayed one in advance because I wanted to give it plenty of time to dry. But what I sprayed it with was the Distress Oxide spray in the Lumberjack Plaid. So I've got a little piece here just to show you how easy this is. I'm going to spritz the entire piece of ribbon, and then I'm going to flip that around. Now, I was just going to use my tweezers. I didn't want to get my fingers dirty at this point, so I ended up putting on a glove, and it's easier if you just use your fingers and just keep dipping it down into that ink and moving it around until you get a nice coverage. Now, I don't like to get a complete coverage. I like kind of those light and dark areas of it. I think it gives it more of an aged look. So these are the ones that I let dry. Just cut a couple of these pieces down to maybe about 7 or 8 inches. And then I'm just feeding it through. I folded it in half, fed it through from the front to the back, and then pulled it through that loop, and then I'm just snipping off those ends. And what's fun about the mummy cloth is you can really age those ends. You can just kind of pull those fibers apart and really get a nice look to them. I added some twine, and I'm going to just tie this right around the base, and I'm going to tie it into a bow. I'll just cut away that excess. Going back to that crayon, as I mentioned before, I decided to add a little pink to these girls' dresses. So I've got that spun sugar again. And then off camera, I came back in with the speckled egg and added it to their little belts. And you'll see that at the very end. I just thought this brightened these up a little bit, just gave it a little more interest. Let's add some glitter. Of course, we have to add some glitter. So I've got the Distress Rock Candy glitter, and I'm going to go back to that matte medium glue, and I'm going to just use my finger. I'm going to just tap on some of that glue. I don't want like straight lines or anything. I just want it to look random. And then I'm just going to sprinkle that glitter on and tap away the excess. And I'll do that all the way around, just in random different areas. That's going to add a really pretty sparkle to this. You could use your mica flakes here as well. That would be really fun. That will add more dimension to this if you use those. But there you can see that pretty sparkle that we have. Just decided to add a little bit more right there. And then I went ahead and did the second one the same way. And you can just put that glitter right back into the container. And for the little resin roses, I decided to take that glue with a brush and apply it just to the top of those little flowers and sprinkle on some glitter, and you'll get a really pretty shimmer to those. With the word tags from the Idea-ology collection, I'm going to grab a couple of these. I grabbed the one that says love, and the other one says happy. And they are little charms, but I typically don't use them that way. I like to cut off that little loop and just use them as some metal embellishments on the front of my tags. So I cut that away, and then you do want to just sand that down. You don't want it to be sharp. So I'm just using my little sanding block and sanding away any of those little rough edges. So now that those are nice and smooth, I'm going back to my Distress crayons. This is the spun sugar, and I'm pressing it right down into that charm. Those letters are raised in there, so I want to press it down, and I don't want it to be perfect. Now you can, if you want to, you can really press it and fill in that whole area, and then just rub over the top, and it will expose the letters and that trim work around the edges. But I wanted it to look more aged, more random. So although I am pressing that crayon down in there, and this is the speckled egg, I am pressing a lot of it off. I'm just using my finger to kind of wipe that away. And there you can see those up close. I did also want to mention that what you can do if you want to remove some more of the ink is just take a paper towel. I'm just dipping it in water and just kind of removing any excess on top, so those letters would be a little bit more exposed. Let's add these to our tags. Again, going back to that matte medium glue, which again will hold down the metal to the paper really nicely. And I did decide to clamp these down with my reverse tweezers just to make sure they dried nicely and in place. Now while those dry, I'm going to add a little bit of spun sugar around the edges of my little quote chip. And again, because those are glossy, just like the paper dolls are, I can easily spread that around. So I don't have to add any matte medium, and I did the other one in the speckled egg. Now I've got some really pretty pearls, and I will list and link these for you as well down at the bottom. One of the colors is taupe, and the other set is a matte gold. So these have a really nice antique-y look to them, but will give us a little combination of colors. So I'm just using my Marvy jewel picker to place those down, and then we can take a closer look at the finished tags. And these are a great way to use up some of your ephemera, which if you're like me, you've collected tons of it, and you have plenty of it to apply to your tags. And it's just a fun way to use a lot of these products that I think sometimes we're a little bit afraid to use, or we set aside and never quite know what to do with them. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. Again, thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.